This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 181 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. So we are mid-corona days and I'm going to tell you all about something that right now you can't do, but down the track we'll all be able to travel again, and then I hope that you might try this out. Now, what is this mysterious thing I'm talking about? Well, you've probably already seen the title and so you know, but I'm talking about small group travel. Now, I have to admit that for many, many years, maybe 15 years of my adult life, I was completely anti any group travel. In fact, I had one horrid memory of going on a single day group trip in New South Wales, the Snowy Mountains, I think, if I'm correct. And I remember it vividly because we had a really horrid, homophobic, nasty driver of the bus, and that kind of ruined any thought I had of ever going on any kind of group trip for many years. Then I discovered that there's lots of ways to travel in small groups on small group tours and actually really enjoy it. So I have learnt a lot. And rather than rave on about my own experiences, I actually have 3 guests today who have some really, really interesting experiences. So my first one is Suzanne Moore, and she relatively recently, late last year I think, did a 1-week small group trip hiking down in the south of my own lovely home state of Western Australia.
One of the trips I got to do without my family last year was to hike the Cape to Cape track in the southwest of WA. So it runs from Cape Naturalist to Cape Lewin Lighthouse. And we did it as a guided tour. A friend invited me at the last minute. It was all very kind of off the cuff. So I didn't have a lot of time for physical preparation to do the hike. But it was a dream of mine. I'd always wanted to do it. I had this image of myself that, like I'm a sort of hardy, robust, outdoorsy kind of person, despite my pale skin and, enjoyment of creature comforts. So we joined a small tour, which ended up being a women's only group, even though it wasn't specifically just for women. But it was a so it was a fundraising group trying to raise funds through Movement for Mental Health for the Gidget Foundation, who take care of women in rural Australia to get access to help for perinatal depression. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is something very close to my heart, and such a great cause and such a good excuse, I think, to
yes,
ditch the family and
a good justification to get out there.
Exactly. Yeah, because otherwise it's just a selfish self-indulgence, right? So it was a 7-day guided tour, and we were it's sort of half glamping in the sense that you don't stay on track. You walk 20 to 23 Ks a day, and then you get bussed back to quite lovely accommodation with incredible food, and can have a shower and rest and sleep properly and recover for the next day. So it's sort of a lovely intro guide to hardcore multi-day hiking.
Sounds perfect.
It is absolutely perfect. And so at the beginning of this, I got very excited. I started training, and we go hiking on the weekends to try and get my fitness up, and I bought new shoes and I bought a new backpack, and I was like, yep, I'm going to do this. And then I started to get a little bit panicky. I'm going, well, I can walk 20 Ks in one day off, once or maybe even twice. How am I going to do this 7 times in a row with no rest? Yeah. And there's all that fear you have that, what if I'm the slowest member of the group? Mm-hmm. What if I don't finish it at all? What if I annoy people? And who the hell am I going on this hike with anyway?
Did you only know your friend and everyone else were strangers? Or?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so it's risky, isn't it? You just don't know.
It's very risky, and I'm quite cantankerous sometimes. I'm a bit of a prickly personality, so I sort of visualize myself with my headphones in, just grumbling along behind the group, whinging to myself about people. And so at the beginning of the walk, right, just before we even left, the car park, the guide went around the group and he sort of said, well, what are you all hoping to get out of this trip? And there was a lot of, I'm looking for headspace. I want to raise money. I want to prove to myself I can do this walk. And my rather lame excuse was, I've always wanted to see it and I want to take some pretty photographs.
That's still good reasons.
It's a good reason, but it's pretty selfish, And so we started the walk, and the first couple of days are very chatty. You've got 10 mums who have escaped their children, kind of let loose into the wilderness, and it was quite confronting. And the women that I was traveling with probably weren't women I would come across in my normal daily life. They all lead very different lives to me. And in the end, that was honestly what made the trip.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the conversation got less and less every day as the walk progressed, because it became much more about, your stamina and your determination to walk past blisters and sore feet and fatigue and things like that. But the kind of that sense of collaboration became very, very strong. And to the point where it was all a lot of mother henning going on. Everybody was checking on people's sunscreen, and everybody was, how much water have you got left? Do you need me to fill up your pack? And here I've got blister packs. No, take my socks. It was very much became a team effort. And when one fell behind, the whole group picked them up. And it wasn't always the same person. Everybody had good days and bad days.
Right.
And so beyond that kind of sense of self-endurance and motivation that you had to develop across those 7 days, you really did become a functioning unit together. And they became some of the most gorgeous, hilarious women I've ever met in my entire life. And I feel very bonded with them, even though it was such a short, sharp experience. And so at the end, we had a celebration dinner at the end of the meal, at the end of the walk. And, the same question was asked. It was, what did you get out of this? And what did you learn? Yeah. And universally, the response changed. It wasn't, I want to know if I can do it, or it was much less self-oriented, the kind of reflection that was coming from everybody. And I, like a good little gold star, 5-star student, I'll tell you what I found. And it was really very emotional. We were all kind of a bit weepy, and I just sort of said, I discovered that despite what I thought, that I struggle to get along with large groups of women, that I am a bit prickly personality, that I like my space, the challenge of doing that physical walk, that feat, with a group of women was so much better than if I'd done it with just my family or just friends that I knew.
Wow.
There was something incredibly special about building those bonds along the track, and about, because, you'd walk next to different women every day and, tell me about your life. And you realize that, you weren't the only one that had problems after you had children, or you weren't the only one that had, physical issues, or that everybody was carrying something different, and they were all there for each other. And it was just such a remarkable experience, both on that personal level, but also in that realization of just how important community is and what it can do for you and the strength it can give you.
Suzy, talking about the strength that the community that you build on a trip like this can give you is something that I think is really important. And I've definitely been on some group trips in the last few years that have really bonded, a small group of us together in such a rapid way. It's a really unique way to build friendships, I think. Now, my next guest is Louise Southerden, and we talked about having, like-minded people come together through the example of a really interesting women's expedition trip that she did.
So last year I did this a Turkey women's expedition run by Intrepid Travel. And so it was all women, but I mean, there are women's trips all over the world, but what I think made this different was that a lot of the experiences we were doing were also led by women, or we went on a boat where the captain was a woman, or we went to a restaurant where it was run by women and it was all women staff, and there were social enterprises. We went to a fantastic place in Istanbul run to help Syrian refugee women, and so it was. Because I think Turkey is one of those places, like some other Middle Eastern countries, where women can be a bit inconspicuous or even invisible to travellers. And I think that's how this range of trips that Intrepid does now in a few countries, Iran, I think in Morocco or two of the others, where they had that feedback from travellers, and so they decided to design a few trips around this theme. And it really works in Turkey because there are so many women doing amazing things. And so the lovely thing about travelling with women, with a woman guide, a Turkish woman guide as well, was that I know, I'm not anti-men at all,
Yeah, me neither.
There's a particular vibe that happens. And I think as a woman, I can't comment on all male trips, and I'm sure they have this sense of camaraderie and like-mindedness and bonding that happens as well. True. But as a woman, I really love that sense of care that you have for each other, and the easing of pressure, and even just comforting each other. All of us have been through big things, as we all do in life, but I think all of the various people recently, there are women who had survived cancer diagnoses and treatment, and there were ones who'd had relationship breakdowns recently, and a lot of us were also going through that time of life with menopause and things like that. So it's stuff that you didn't have to censor yourself. You could talk about anything, and there was no judging, or I just found that we all really came together as a group, and that it was interesting because it kind of elevated the trip or gave it another dimension on top of the group travel, experiencing a different culture thing. We had this lovely interaction, and it was just it's hard to put it into words, but it was really just a lovely quality that was added, and I guess it just is dependent on the particular group of people that you have. But I think those kind of trips do probably attract a certain kind of person, perhaps. And I think also what was interesting was that all the women there were really interested in women's issues. Some of them worked as psychologists, some were social workers, others were academics who had studied gender equality. It was just really interesting. In fact, that was a lot of our discussions weren't really even about Turkey and the buses going between places. They were just about, the role of women, women's lot in society and throughout history. And our guide was, was doing her master's, I think she was doing it in religion in Turkey, but she also had a great take, having lived and worked in Turkey all her life, and been to experience a life as a Turkish woman. And even one night, I remember she divulged this really personal story about some bad things that had happened to her, and you just wouldn't have that, I think, on a mixed group or on a trip that didn't have that sensitivity to those issues.
Yeah, I think so. I have been a reluctant group traveller in the past, but then I think over time, and having kind of incidentally had more and more experiences like that, I think if you can find a group of like-minded people, then that can really enhance the trip, rather than, my initial thought was group travel detracts from it. I can do this myself. I don't need this. But, and that sounds like a perfect example, like the people who are going to pick a women's only trip to Turkey with, that women's kind of focus with even the guides and stuff. That's going to be a certain kind of person, and it's highly likely you're going to get along well and have lots of interesting things to talk about. And it sounds like that's exactly what happened.
That is, and I think that kind of hits the nail on the head with the small group travel for me, that, you have lovely company, you have people to do things with. And I think, I think often I love the idea of traveling on my own, and I have done a lot of solo travel through my life and as a travel writer as well. And I do love the freedom of that, but there's something about, looking at something amazing or meeting some local people in the company of other people and just having that shared. I don't know. I mean, we all want to share our travel experiences, don't we? I mean, that's why Instagram's so big and other social media. And I think having other people right there in the flesh is really powerful. I don't know, maybe it cements the experience more strongly in our minds. And I think, the idea that with a small group you can also have themed travel with themed trips, which gives travel more power, I guess, instead of just looking at things in a superficial way. You can really go deep into one theme and look at a country through that lens. The company, the camaraderie, the themes. And I think another thing I love about small group trips is that it often gives you access to things that you would never find if you were traveling on your own.
Yeah.
Without maybe extensive research or particular knowledge or contacts in the place where you're going. So, and I know there are more and more group trips are doing this where they actually give you behind the scenes access. So you might go to a famous destination like the Uffizi in Florence, but you'll go there after hours or even before the museum opens, and it'll only be you there, your group there. So I think that stuff is really, really special when you're with a small group and you get to either meet people you would never have met before, or you have access to places that you would never have found on your own.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of best of both worlds, isn't it? So, and like you say, some of it is stuff that would be pretty nearly impossible to do without that extra access. It's really hard to find the right contacts just, on the internet or asking around. But having a themed, especially like quite a targeted group and a group theme, a theme for the trip, that can make all the difference. As Lou said, there are lots of advantages of small group trips that traveling independently don't always afford you. So there's, I think I was a really slow learner about this, and I'm glad I'm finally understanding that there's definitely a real time and a place, a good time and a place for traveling on a small group tour. Now, my final guest today is Andrew Tyree from Coast to Costa, and he actually leads group trips, and it was really interesting to talk to him about his experience doing this. And he sounds like he leads the kind that I would like to be part of. Now, the sound quality is just a little dodgy from time to time because, well, we were very, very far away, a whole hemisphere away. But I think it's good enough that you'll get some interesting info and even some laughs.
I actually like to joke that we're a group travel company for people who hate group travel. So I totally get that. I've done like a ton of solo travel on my own or just travel like alone with my wife. The cool thing with group travel is that you get a lot of people who are like-minded in doing kind of the same experience. So it kind of creates like a lot of just like sort of inside jokes or like group jokes or like group kind of bonding throughout the trip. And you end up being friends with a lot of these people because you're going through these like kind of crazy travel experiences with them. And so it ends up kind of like bringing a lot of people together. And I really love that in this day and age where everyone is a lot more isolated, I feel, people are a lot less kind of social. It kind of, you get 10 strangers and throw them in a van and watch the magic that happens. It's pretty amazing.
I that's exactly what my experience was like of group travel too. But I think you have to offer a particular kind of trip to get the really like-minded people together, right?
Very much so. So we do like cultural tours, specifically in Cuba is kind of our main thing, but these cultural, locally led tours in Cuba and Peru and Mexico and Spain and soon Colombia. So it's people definitely with kind of an emphasis on like locally provided things and the cultural end of things. Ours are very like art and music and sort of food heavy. So it definitely brings kind of a certain type of people. Basically, it's kind of, I have this sort of theory that if you're willing to jump in a van with 10 strangers in Cuba, especially for us Americans, which is a country we're not allowed to go to, you're probably going to be okay with me. You're probably going to be pretty cool in my book, you know? And it ends up working out like very, very well for the most part. People really do get along. It kind of creates a culture within a culture, we like to say, because you'll end up, you know, meeting these friends. Remember that one time we did this thing, and, you know, people will go back to their own cities, and like, best friend groups have been formed. This one couple is getting married. One couple got engaged on a trip of ours. Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's like it seems people are like, I don't want to go on a group trip, and then you go on a group trip and you're like, oh my God, I love all my like group travel friends. So it's pretty fun.
Do you also take small groups? So like
we do,
like really like 10 people literally, or not more, not huge groups.
Yeah. Not huge groups. The most we've done, like the most we'll do is like 18. I actually did a private group of 50 to Cuba kind of recently. Well, in March, I know, whoa is right. We're actually a company. So it was like the top 25 salespeople in a company. It was an incentive trip. And it ended up being fantastic. I was kind of nervous about it. Cuba's not always the highest functioning of countries. It's you know, things run a little kind of like crazily over there, but we did 50 people and it ran like perfectly. It was kind of incredible. I was a little nervous at the beginning, and I just absolutely loved it. So I'm hoping to take that company on like regular incentive trips, hopefully.
See, I'm self-employed, and this is the only downside of being self-employed. No one's gonna take me on an incentive trip, but I guess I can take myself. So it's all good.
I was gonna say you can incentivize yourself. You're like, yeah, I won again. You could be the winner every year.
Well, maybe that's the excuse for some of my trips. Absolutely, I've just incentivized myself regularly,
totally.
So it's all good.
You've done so well this year. You should take yourself on a trip again and again.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Because I'm not sure I want to travel with like 49 of my friends. So.
No, that's a lot. That one was a lot. No, your incentive trip might be a lot cooler. You can pick where you want. You know, you don't have to clear it with anyone. You're the boss. You get to like choose where to go and who to go with. It's pretty great.
Yeah. So maybe situation. It's okay. Oh my goodness. When you took a group trip away for the very first time, did anything go wrong?
Oh man, I mean, yeah, of course. Obviously. So first time I took a group that was kind of an official coast to coast trip was in 2012, and we did a food and wine trip to Barcelona and like the wine region around Barcelona. And it was like friends of mine and friends of friends that I took on the initial group. And I feel that the first one, I basically arranged like really cool lunches and dinners at like these like famous spots and of chefs that I knew and all this stuff. It was like extremely curated, where it was all 10 of us. I think there were 8 of us on that one, 9 with me, but all 9 of us had every single meal together, and every single activity and every single thing was planned by me. That was a huge mistake on my part, because I will never do that again, because it was just like, you know, some people would be laying down for a nap and I'd be like knocking on their door being like, hey, we're late for lunch reservations and things like that. So that one was kind of like a mistake on my end.
Yeah.
On that one also, I got really intense. I was eating, they had like these like dried sausage called fuet in Catalonia and like Barcelona area. And I was like, oh great, I'm going to have myself, you know, some fuet. We went to the beach. I was just cutting it up and eating it. I'm really into it. It's just like a cured, like really dry kind of salami. I was eating a lot of that. I think that gave me something, you know, not good in the guts. So that was another, it was like dried salami just in the sun near the beach. I was like, that's a great idea. And in retrospect, I was like, oh yeah, that was not at all a good idea. So that planning too many things with people, buying dried sausages. Everyone else was like, no, I'm good. I just basically ate the whole thing myself and paid the price later. Those were a couple of things that went wrong on the first one. And then, I mean, there's been a whole string of, you know, especially like when we transitioned, when we started doing Cuba in 2015, after a couple of years of doing Barcelona or doing Spain and doing Mexico. I mean, we've had tires that have blown out. We've run over a migration of crabs at one point. We actually like doubled back. So we're driving from Havana to the town of Trinidad, and we go through like the Bay of Pigs and along kind of the south coast of the island. So we get all the way down to the Bay of Pigs. We have this amazing lunch. We go swimming in the Bay of Pigs. It's really beautiful. Also, don't let the name, kind of turn you up. Bay of Pigs is beautiful. It's not piggish at all. It's lovely. So we're swimming, we're having this thing. My driver comes up. He's like, Andrew, like, it's April, and April is when the crabs migrate across the freeways. So we have to double back, go back almost all the way to Havana, and kind of double back and take the freeway around. So it's like, okay, you guys, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is like an earlier group of mine. This is like beginning like March or April of 2016. This is probably my third or fourth trip to Cuba. I'm like, all right, you guys, we're going to have to go back around. We have to avoid these crabs. There's 2 vegans on the trip, and just 2 guys that were just super fun, but really loud and kind of crazy. So I'm like, okay, we're going to double around. Everyone's like, okay, that sounds totally fine. So we drive all the way around, and we're talking now, this is like maybe 8 hours in a van driving across Cuba. Like the tire had popped once, and we get almost to the town of Trinidad, and literally we had to cross over a mile of these millions of migrating crabs, migrating across the freeway. And the driver's just like,
did the crabs not realize they should avoid the freeway?
Oh my gosh. None of them. It was just like a big pink freeway for as long as you could see. And probably for about a mile, we're just running over crabs. There's nothing we could do. There's nowhere we could go. And our driver's like, we got to just go. The vegans are like literally screaming in the back. The boys are like, oh my God, this is crazy. Everyone's like yelling. My driver's like, tell them to shut up, Andrew. Tell them to shut up. He's all stressed out. I'm like, everybody be quiet in the back. And just literally running over these tiny poor crabs that are like, have no idea what's going on. They're just going on the other side to like lay their eggs and then go back to the sea. It was rough. It was rough. I try to avoid that month now.
Those poor crabs, hey? I know even before I heard these stories about some of the things that can go wrong when you're leading a group trip, I was already quite confident that it is not something I want to do. The stress of the logistics of all of that kind of stuff is, I think, I'm not exactly detail oriented enough to thrive in such an industry. So I think I'll continue to take the trips, but not to run them. So I hope you've learned some interesting things about various kinds of group travel. I'd love to hear more about the kind of small group trips that you've taken over the years. Don't forget to come along to our Facebook group for thoughtful travellers and tell us there. Of course, as always, thank you very much to my fabulous guests. First up, I spoke with Suzanne Moore, and you can find Suzy's work at suzannemorewriter.com, and she just released her book, The Place Between. After that, I chatted with Louise Southerden, and Lou has a great site at noimpactgirl.com where she blogs, as well as writing for all kinds of magazines and newspapers and so on. And last but definitely not least, a big thanks to Andrew Tyree from Coast to Costa, and you can find out more about his trips at coasttocosta.com. All of these links and the show notes will be at notaballerina.com/181. So stay safe and stay home for now, unless you're listening to this later, in which you can explore the world freely. And thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.